Right, so 3, 2, 1. Welcome back, folks, to the WP-Tonic This Week in WordPress and SaaS. It's episode 719. Yes, that's correct.
719.
19, yes, Josepha. We got a really special guest. We got Josepha. She's the executive director of the WordPress project. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce her surname. I pre-warned her. I'm going to let her do that because I will just destroy it, as I destroy every guest's surname that comes on this show, seemingly. So I'm not going to embarrass myself. I've got my great co-host Andrew as well. So, Josepha, would you like to quickly introduce yourself to the tribe?
Yeah, my name is Josepha Haden Chomphosy. Nailed it. I've been saying my name all my life, so don't worry. I had a lot of practice.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And my
amazing.
name, I think we can get to know Josepha a little through this interview. But my name's Andrew Palmer. I'm with Bertha AI. We help you right where you work. So that's
great. And before we go into this great interview, I got a few adverts from our major sponsors. We'll be back in a few moments. We're coming back. Just want to point out, Tribe, that we got some great special offers from our sponsors, some great WordPress recommendations, plugins, services. You can get all these goodies by going over to WP-Tonic/recommendations, and you can consume them all there, Tribe. So let's go straight in it. So I feel that WordPress is kind of really at a crossroads. You know, I just sense, and I just want to see if you feel like this, that the next 18 months are going to be a kind of semi-rebirth of the WordPress project, or it could go into a slight terminal decline. I don't know why I feel that, but I do want to.
Terminal have never been used together in a sentence before.
No,
slightly dead.
Yeah.
No, but what sorts of things are on your mind that make you think that? First off, like.
Well, I just feel that the Gutenberg project has enormous possibilities, but also I think it hasn't really gone that well. But it's spilt milk, so I don't want to become a pain in the posterior attacker of it. But also the reality is the reality. I also feel that the contradictions of what WordPress.org might want and what Automattic might want are really in their head, but on the same path. They will always be intertwined to some degree, but so I think there's a number of issues that need clarifying, and if they are clarified, the project can move forward and be and also COVID and the way that affected WordCamps and the community in general. So there's a lot in the brew, the witch's brew. I don't know if you see it that way.
So I have I work on almost no projects that are small timelined, right? Like all the projects that I ever work on anymore are at minimum 3 years to accomplish. And so like I have a really different perspective than a lot of people on those things. But as far as like what is, to my mind, the most pernicious problem, the biggest problem that we have in the next 18 months, is 100% the problem of getting everybody back to our in-person events. Like our in-person events are the thing that makes sure that people know how to use WordPress once they've inherited it, or once someone has asked them to do it, or once they're trying to learn a new skill set. It's where we get people aware of the community and like who's here and who's here for them as they are working through stuff. And so like, do we have a moment where we're like, this could make or break how we're going to get things done in the future? I think that biggest problem is going to be around getting all of those people back together in the way that we like people to get together in WordPress, in that kind of like inspire and contribute and build something cool and be good to each other kind of way, as opposed to in the like get in there and get swag kind of way, which is not my preferred reason to get everybody together. But yeah, I do think that there are some big questions that are going to really press us in the next 18 months, but I think it's mostly around getting everybody back with us.
Is that aimed? I've always felt that WordCamps have been aimed at developers more than the user, if you like, because WordPress has still got the DIYer. They spot it and they see it and they say, okay, well, I can use that, and there's loads of free themes and loads of free plugins, and I can start my blog, or I can start my shop with WooCommerce and things like that. I think what John's pertaining to is, and you have actually answered this question a couple of weeks ago, 5 for the future, the confusion around that, about the fact that you're sponsored by you're actually paid by Automattic, you're sponsored by Automattic to be the director of WordPress, right? So the conflict of interests around what Automattic are doing, what WordPress.org is, what 5 for the future is, basically asking volunteers or companies that make money out of WordPress to contribute, and excluding we've got Bertha, and Bertha is a free plugin in there. I've got another free plugin there, 50,000 users. We're quite as far as I can see, a contributor to WordPress, but not in 5 for the future terms. And it's those kind of things, the design of the make.wordpress, the new design of the make.wordpress site, where the first comment is from Matt saying, basically, this is a waste of time, what you're doing it for, and all that kind of stuff. So we're trying to find in our as members of the community, and I attend as many WordCamps as I can. I was in Serbia, Berlin, US, St. Louis, all that kind of stuff. So I like to go to the WordCamps mainly for networking and meeting up with people and doing business. And that's what I want to end the confusion of. Actually, we are all in this business to make a profit, one would hope.
I will give you a general heads up that the conversation around 5 for the future is really heartbreaking to me right now. And so I get worked up about it. So I'm going to let you know that in advance.
Yeah, well, I'm cool with that. I'm just going to say one more thing on that.
Yeah.
I think your answer was the most appropriate. There's no blowing smoke going on. You addressed that in a really good way, a community manager's way. And that's it. It's an aspiration. And I think that should be for 5 for the future. I think that should be the mantra. It's an aspiration. So, I don't need to cause you offense, and I understand that it's a difficult one.
You are not causing me offense. I am just heartbroken because it's a really complicated conversation that is being made into a simple discussion. And that's what I find super heartbreaking about it. So I understand that there's a lot of concern right now around 5 for the future, what I mean, what Matt means, what WordPress means, what it should mean. I get that. And I also see that everything that moves someone forward into using WordPress or makes their use of WordPress easier is a contribution to WordPress's continued success. Like, I know that. I think everyone knows that. And the part that I have been trying to express recently that I think is getting turned into just like this really flattened conversation is around the programs that have been built in service of that 5 for the future call. There is a general philosophical call, like give back to WordPress if you have gotten anything from WordPress. And I think that's beautiful. And I think it exists forever and always should just be that big aspirational call. But the programs that are built in service of like come together and make WordPress better are built to recruit and train and retain contributions from contributors that are knowledgeable and expert and have a enough time and availability to help make sure that this gigantic project
Sure.
is moving forward well and long into the future after we are not there for it. And so like there are a lot of conversations around like how am I defining an economy? I talk a lot about, I mention a lot rather, I don't talk about it a lot because it's scary, but I mention a lot like the alternative economies of WordPress and how we are investing in those and what that all means. And the conversation that happens around like how we entice and elicit and support future contributions to WordPress is the conversation I want to have. I don't want to be having the conversation around like, do you believe that people who use WordPress for free or cheap matter? Yes, I do. I want like 98% of people to be able to use WordPress for free or cheap.
Yeah.
Forever. And so like, I feel like that conversation is getting really kind of, yeah, it's being made into a simple thing when it's very much not. And so that's what I mean by I get heartbroken by that conversation right now. I get worked up
the
about
whole
it.
point behind WordPress and the whole point behind the repository and everything is that it's free at point of entry, right?
Yeah, can we I've got some more questions.
Questions,
Andy.
I think you've answered that very well, Josepha. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So
sorry,
we've got some obviously some challenges, but we also got some great opportunities. I think at Porto, WordCamp Europe, you clearly saw the internationalization of WordPress. And do you see some of the biggest growth being outside the traditional markets of North America and Western Europe? Because one of the things I observed at Porto was there was people from all over the world. And that really is one of the great opportunities and strengths of WordPress, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. I do think there's opportunity for growth outside of those traditional markets. I hate to call them traditional markets because like surely the US is not the only folks who have commerce and need websites and stuff. But like, yes, I agree. There's a big opportunity for growth there.
Right. How do you see the relationship between WordPress.org and Automattic? And do you feel in the coming 18 months, 2 years, there has to be, how to put it, a more clarification, a more open discussion about how that relationship can benefit both and be more clarified? Is that making sense?
You're asking what is the relationship?
Okay. Let me put it in a slightly different way.
Okay.
We have WordPress.org, we have Automattic, we have the WordPress project. Basically, Automattic is the the main sponsor of WordPress. The person in charge of Automattic is also the person in charge of WordPress and a number of other products, stuff like that. So I think what John is hinting at is, should there be a clearer separation between .org and .com? That's and how do you think that ambiguity affects the WordPress project?
So
going forward.
Yeah. So I mean, we're asking about specifically WordPress.org and WordPress.com. I do think that there's a lot of confusion there, and I think that everybody agrees with that.
Sure.
I think that what we don't agree with is that Automattic gets a disproportionate benefit from that confusion. I think we don't necessarily agree with that. Confusion at all times. If a user, if a customer of WordPress is joining WordPress.com or .org with the expectation of having the other one, like that's not a good user experience.
No,
and I don't think that anyone would fight with that sentence. But like, does it make sense to have more clarification around what one is versus the other? I think it always does, because it serves our users better. Yes. So yes.
But
And
how's
then,
that going to happen? Because it's still, I have clients, I've got a little agency as well, and they say, oh, we're using WordPress. So they immediately said, a couple of clients, literally more than a couple, just set up a WordPress.com account because I said, yeah, we're going to be using WordPress. And I said, well, you didn't necessarily need to do that because we're self-hosted WordPress, and whereas WordPress.com is a hosting service as well, as you can build the website on there, but there's certain restrictions. We can't use certain plugins and all that kind of stuff and whatever. So there is a definite need some clarification from a user perspective, not a developer perspective, a user perspective of what's the difference between WordPress.com and what's the difference between WordPress the project, where you can just go into any host and install a WordPress website. And that's the confusion. And also you've got VIP as well with WordPress.com.
right.
You've got different offerings. We had some pricing confusion about 3 months ago, which now has been reverted back to what the pricing
I'm
was.
just going to give us a real clarification here. I have no involvement with WordPress.com. I
understand. So I'm just
I'm
asking
not able
before,
to necessarily answer how they are going to clarify their.
how do you think that should be addressed, though? Do you think that should be addressed, or is just a no comment situation from where you're sitting?
Well, it's not that I have no comment. It's that I specifically focus on WordPress and self-hosted WordPress. And so like I can't necessarily speak correctly about what it is that's happening inside.
It's fine. It's just
Automattic brand.
because we ask ourselves those kind of questions all the time. We can't answer those questions either because we're neither, we're just WordPress developers and we build websites. So yeah, that's fine.
Never say just. Never say just.
Yeah, but just to comment, I think that is the crux of the question, really. You've just pointed it out. That's what we're trying to get some insight about your own thoughts about this, because that is obviously, you are the public face of WordPress.org, not Automattic. But to default to say, but in reality, to say the two are not totally, to some degree, intertwined, in my opinion, would be slight, I wouldn't say misleading, but a more
confusing. Confusing.
Yes, confusing. Does this need to be clean? I wouldn't say cleaned up, but clarified in a much more coherent way of what is Automatic's domain and what is WordPress.org's domain.
I mean, I know that I tell people this all the time, and I think it's really hard to hear. Like, I have a high expectation for myself to have a separation of any sort of interest in Automatic's products versus WordPress's features. And I know that people really, really feel like I must be lying, but I'm not. Like this is as true.
I think that's a very strong. You don't strike me as somebody like that at all. So, but obviously, you've got to be very diplomatic. Obviously, you are a very diplomatic person. Obviously, you got to be. So that's why I'm asking very broad questions, because to ask you to give specifics on a podcast in front of me and Andrew would be ridiculous. You're not going to do it. I'm just trying to get.
I mean, I did do it. Those are the specifics.
No, definitely, Josepha, you have definitely answered the question. Let's move on to the next question if it's appropriate. But it's a tough. You're walking a tough line, right? Because you've got to you represent thousands of people. Thousands of contributors, of developers, but you on the WordPress.org side, it's a really tough situation, and you are sponsored by Automattic, so it's you can see where, if you're a guy on the street like me, walking up and down the street thinking about what's the difference between WordPress.com and WordPress.org, that question's got to be asked. It doesn't necessarily have to be answered.
I mean, here's the thing, like, it would be inaccurate for me to say that I do not have any concern about what happens with the products at Automattic, because Automattic, of course, pays my bills, but I think what's really important to remember here is that Automattic also provides all of the underwriting, a majority underwriting for the WordPress project to make sure that it remains available for free on an infrastructure that is up like 99% of the time.
Sure.
And in a way that brings a diverse group of people into the space of having a changed life pattern. Like it enables WordPress enables opportunity for people.
Sure.
And as Automattic sits as the primary underwriter of being able to offer that freedom to multiple people across the hundreds of thousands of people across the world at all times, yeah, I am always concerned with how Automattic is functioning or not, how Automattic's businesses are doing. But so, I mean, it would be false to say that I don't have concerns because I care so much about what WordPress represents to the world and to the people that provide, that get a benefit from us, that don't know that I even exist, that don't know Automattic exists. And like, I think that there's an extent to which it is a bad faith argument to say, like, how can I pretend, like, how can I make it clear that I don't care about Automattic? Of course I do. Like anyone who is working with WordPress and believes in what it can do for other people should care about the group that is providing all of its infrastructure, because like they pay for all the server space, they do all of the things that make WordPress forever available to people, and I think that matters.
I agree.
I don't know that I answered anyone's questions right now so much
but
as
it's
just like said a bunch of stuff.
You definitely answered the question. It's a tough question to answer, and it's it's a bit of a drive-by shooting, to be honest, because
I agree.
We've got to be cognizant of the fact that you are in charge of WordPress.org, and a load of people, and the volunteers, and the people on the forums that answer questions, and the moderators that control how plugins are presented and renamed and copyright. I came a cropper the other day because one of my plugins had a trademark before it, and it's okay to have to trademark after it because it's for this particular thing. So we were taken down for a day until we fixed it, so that was fine, and it was literally a day. So that shows the proficiency of the system. Do you see what I mean? So you're doing a great job, right? So it's not, that question was a drive-by shooting, and I understand how difficult it is to answer in any way, whether it's correct or incorrect or unbiased or biased. It's one of the most difficult questions you probably have to face. So let's move on to the next one.
Yeah, we need to go for our break and give Josepha a little break from our interrogation. We will be back in a few moments, folks. We're coming back. Me and Andrew have been put in our place. We deserve it, though.
Because no, because people are going to believe you all.
It's only English. I'm only kidding. I'm only kidding. It's English sarcasm.
I'd rather have a cigarette.
So before we go into the second half of this great interview, I just want to point out that I write a weekly newsletter. You can go to WP-Tonic/newsletter. We discuss all the Friday stories that we discuss, plus I do an interesting editorial, and you can get all that by going there and signing up. So we had an interesting first half. So I think just to comment, basically this is an open source project. Obviously, this is a tricky beast. This isn't like a commercial company because you're dealing with an open source project. So if you were dealing with just a normal commercial enterprise of the size of the WordPress ego system, it would be complicated as it is. But when you add on the layer of open source and open source projects on top of it, we're dealing with a complicated beast here, which you are well aware of. What I think I want, So for a long time, there's different, I call them buckets. There's different people in the game, as I call it. You know, you've got the hosting companies, you've got Automattic, you've got WordPress.org, you've got the WordCamps, you've got the, it's all in the brew, as I say. And what I think is happening is there's different forces trying to move things in their direction, and there's counter forces wanting to move it into another direction. And if there isn't any real vision or any real structure where we're going, you just get disharmony, and you just get different forces that want to go different directions. First of all, do you agree with what I just outlined? And have you got any insights about how more harmony can be imposed upon? Imposed is probably the wrong word, but encouraged?
So in theory, you just posed a theory of if people do not have some concept of where we're going, if people do not have a vision, they can't get to the vision. Yes, I agree with that. I agree with that for sure. I feel like WordPress at the moment does have a clear vision. It sounds like you don't agree with that statement.
No, I don't. I think it's a bit of a ship without a captain to some degree.
Well, Josepha's the captain. It's my job. It's. I think WordPress. I think he's referring to Automattic rather than that. So ignore that comment.
Yes, I am.
WordPress.org definitely has a direction to go in. You've got the Gutenberg project. You've got the community building, the diversity, which I know that you're really interested in making sure that we are a diverse community and acceptance of that as well. From every single aspect that you can think of diversity. We've got the accessibility issues as well. I know that you're concentrating on trying to get everybody accessible. It's difficult to make WordPress accessible because you've got users using it. So that can take away the accessibility in a heartbeat, and all that stuff.
Turns out when you introduce people to anything, it makes it complicated.
Well, exactly. So yeah, us humans, the world would be a much better place without us, to frankly. But there'd be no global warming for a start. But anyway, the point is that the direction what direction are we going in, Josepha, with WordPress? What are you, as director of WordPress, what are you focusing on, like you say, for your long-term projects over the next 3 years? Where's that going to take us?
Yeah, so I put up our big picture post for the year. And I think that there are two things in that post that people lose track of. So for one, from a technological standpoint, like obviously we're still in the middle of the Gutenberg project, which is a lengthy project and was designed to be so. But the other two things that are just kind of big picture elements that I didn't want to get too prescriptive on, because I believe that the community is closer to all of these things than I am, and so therefore can advise me the best about what to do next. One is making sure that we have everything that someone might need who is starting with WordPress and wants to build a site, have everything that they might need to get that going available on WordPress.org, the website. And so we've got Openverse in there, the photo directory in there now, the plugin and theme repositories that are getting some sprucey updates to their the pattern directory, all those things. That is a big picture goal for me, is making sure that whatever you need to get your website running is available to you on WordPress.org, the website. So that's a number one thing that's very important to me. And then the other thing that is important to me as well is putting a little bit of care and attention into the tools and infrastructure that we offer to our community of contributors. They've been saying there are pockets of our community who've been saying for years, like, our tools aren't what we need to get this done. If we had this, it would be better. If we could do this, it would be better. And we are making those changes. So There are a bunch of changes coming to the tools that the Polyglots team uses. We just finished a bunch of changes to the way that the theme repository is able to check themes for their excellence in the repo, and working on the same thing for the plugin directory as well. So making sure that whatever it is that our teams of contributors are doing to make sure that our WordPress users of the world can have excellent resources with all the open source freedoms available to them on the site as easily as possible. Those are the things that we're working on this year.
Yeah,
and so
Good.
that's my goal for the next 2 or 3 years, apart from Gutenberg, which I realize is not a flashy, exciting thing. But for me, it is very much aligned with making sure that people who use WordPress have what they need to make sure that WordPress.
Well, don't you feel it's more like fine tuning the engine, right? You've got to make sure that the battery's working, the spark plugs are working, the tires are of legal, depth and all that kind of stuff. Because otherwise the infrastructure will fall apart. So you've got to make sure, and it is boring, and none of us like to look back and say, right, we've got to get this infrastructure right. It's expensive to run. Two, there's legacy debt, technical legacy debt there as well, which you've got to, one of the things that has helped WordPress definitely has been the backward compatible ness of it. A lot of other CMSs, where I can think of 3 CMSs that have lost massive market share because of their lack of ability with backward models. And then, that's why we're using WordPress, because we know that it's being worked on all the time. 6.1's out already, and 6.2's coming around the corner, and all that kind of stuff. But how much of that are you involved in on the development side of say a new WordPress version, 6.1 or 6.2 or whatever? Are you involved in that at all?
Like the features that are going into it, or our timelines, or which part
managing of it, the people reporting to you to say how it's going, organization of the contributors? I know that I think 6 was 100% women, wasn't it?
5.6,
yeah, so 5.6, right? So you've got
women and non-binary.
So you've got all those things to think about as well. So I think your role is partly politician, definitely, partly CEO. You give the direction, and people have to report to you. Partly CFO, because you must have a look at the costs as well. So you're basically running a multi-million-dollar business.
Yes.
Every single day of your life, and you've got to forward think, and then you've got to put up with guys like us asking you awkward questions. I get your job. Your job is pretty tough, right? So anyway, moving on. Jonathan, you got any other questions apart from 3 or 4? I think 5. What
well, kind of obviously one of the aspects of this interview and this discussion is, and I was there when Matt made the statement that he saw himself as a benevolent dictator of WordPress.
Which, for the record, is not a Matt coined term. That is an open source term that he didn't come up with.
I know. I've got to be honest, it didn't go down very well with me. But on the other hand, he's a great man. The aspect of this, which Andrew's just pointed out, that other open source projects have kind of, for various reasons, have kind of imploded. And the history of open source projects are a bit like that. They get to a certain stage and then they just implode. So what I'm getting to is I won't want to see WordPress being managed by a committee, because I just don't think that works. But on the other hand, I'm not keen in the title of a benevolent dictator. Is there a middle way?
Yeah. So for what it's worth, there is structure in the WordPress project. There is a bit of structure because, of course, no one person can keep track of everything that's happening in the WordPress project. And that has been a true sentence for at least like the last 17 years. It has been a very long time since one person could track everything that was happening and also make sure that like the resources that we need to keep investing in WordPress exist, and also that the technical forward thinking is occurring and that the ecosystem maintenance is happening. Like no one human being can track that anymore. And so there is structure. I don't want people to think that I'm just like some brilliant wunderkind who figured out how to do all this by herself. Like,
why not?
Well, because it's not fair to the role, number one. I think, and this is, I don't know that any leaders in WordPress ecosystem period agree with what I'm about to say, so I'm just going to own this. I believe that an important part of my leadership tasks, and this has been true for my entire leadership career, is to make sure that the organization that I am guiding can survive after I've stopped guiding it. Because if I don't do that, it means I didn't trust enough in the organization, or that I didn't believe enough in its long-term value to bother to figure out how to make it sustainable past me. And so, like, I know that someday WordPress will no longer be willing to be led by me. Like, the reason that I am able to lead WordPress is because WordPress wants to be led by me. That's it. And at some point they will not want to anymore. And I would hate if what I did in my time being a leader for WordPress was make it so that I could never be replaced. And so, like, to tell people that, like, by myself, I'm managing everything and I see it all and you should too, means that no one will ever be willing to join me in learning how to do this work long term. And so that's why I don't want to say it.
I get that. That's management 101, isn't it? The sign of a good manager or a sign of a good leader is that they can be made redundant and it wouldn't actually make any difference to the organization, apart from people crying a lot, but that's, I've always said that as a consultant, when I was running companies as interim MDs, my job as a consultant was to make myself redundant as quickly as possible. One, to save the company money, and two, to save the company, So I think that's a given. I mean, do you think you're doing a good job? Let me qualify that by saying I think you're doing a good job. It's a tough job to do, but do you think you're doing a good job?
Of working with WordPress, of guiding WordPress?
Yeah. What could you do better, do you think?
So, for general context, I think that my body of work stands for itself. I have done a lot to make sure that WordPress has some way to remain long-term sustainable from all of the things that need to be sustainable for WordPress. I've done a lot of research around what worked and didn't for other open source projects, both that define themselves the way that I define us and those that don't, the way that we function, similar and not similar. Like, I've done a lot of work to make sure that I understand what we are doing as people in open source, and especially WordPress. And so, yes, I do think I have done a good job of making sure that WordPress is more structured now than it was before, more documented now than it was before, more open now than it was before. Absolutely, I think I'm doing a good job of that. Do I think I could do a better job? Always, but that's because I am my own harshest critic. I don't know that anyone could look at if anyone were to look at not only all of the changes that I have helped guide this project through, but also all of the work that went into preparing for that, because none of it happened on a whim. I don't think that we're going to find a lot of people who are like, oh, I could have done that better, faster, and with half as much upset. Like, I'm not sure that we could find people who would agree with that statement if they knew the full bulk of the work that's happening.
Sure.
And so, what is the thing that I would do better if I could? The thing I would do better if I could is make sure that people see that the types of functional groups that the teams for the WordPress project fall into, while they all are interconnected and related and important, I wish that people saw more readily that accessibility is an overarching issue, but 100% lives and breathes inside core. It should be a core concept. Design applies to everything, but 100% should be inside core as the thing that has the lowest common denominator and can affect the most change in most places. I don't know any way to help people see, like, these are our smallest common denominators that make the most change for the most people with the least effort. It's still a huge effort, but the least effort from any group of people. I don't know how to help people see that because it feels uncomfortable in open source to talk about an organization as kind of a businessy thing. It feels really unsettling. And so I don't have any way to help people see that more, but I wish that they saw how much their work affected one another so that they could see where their duty of care rolls up into the space.
No, I think that's a valid argument. You know, the business, it is a business. Whether it's open source or not, it's still you still have to have a structure to it. So I think that's a fair thing. And maybe the way to do that is just to tell people about it. You know, this is how we're structured. This is the structure.
People are not interested. They shut down when I start talking about my work, and I get it. My work is hard and complicated. I know. I know.
I wouldn't like to be. I wouldn't like to be you. I wouldn't like to run the WordPress project. You know, it's a tough.
Well, it's interesting, but I wouldn't be up for it. I just couldn't cope with all the politics and trying to keep all these people happy. It would just. I just implode, to be quite truthful about it. My patience would be stretched, to be quite truthful about it. But at least I know that. I think, are you okay to stay on for another 10 minutes for our bonus? Or that'd be great. We're going to end the podcast part of the show because we like to keep it around 30, 35 minutes. Okay. So how can people find out more about what you're up to and what you're thinking at the present moment? Have you got a blog or a particular URL you can send people that can find out more about your thoughts?
Yeah, so you can read everything I've ever written about leadership on josepha.blog/ no. Yeah, it's in the leadership section, but josepha.blog is where you can read everything I've ever written about leadership. You also can read a bunch that I've written specifically about the open source structure inside WordPress and how it applies to WordPress on make.wordpress.org/updates. Everything in there is just an exploration of what I've seen and what I believe. And then make.wordpress.org/project. That's a newer site. And it exists so that when I have to talk about leadership things or structural things that are specific to maintaining the project as a whole, it's in specific project spaces. And so, yeah, that's where people can see everything I've ever thought about open source.
Right.
Don't be scared, everyone. It's okay.
I'll be open after the interview. Andrew, can we peer into your mind into a similar
I'll
scale?
tell you what.
Had
a feel inadequate. You can go to thisisandrewpalmer.com and find out all about me. I'm a plugin developer and investor in plugins as well. So, and you can find me at Arnie Palmer on Twitter. That's it.
That's great. Josepha, you've been brilliant. Thanks for putting up with my nonsense. But you can watch the bonus content and the whole interview by going over to the WP-Tonic YouTube channel. Josepha has agreed to stay on for a little while. I know she's a busy lady. We'll be back next week with another great interview. We'll see you soon, tribe. Bye.
See ya.
Little bye for anyone who sees the rest of it.
Oh, yeah, they will.
We'll do the big bye later.
Yes,
we'll do the big bye later.
Big bye. I think the Gutenberg project has shown the strengths and the weaknesses of the WordPress community very well. Obviously, I have publicly stated that I really support the Gutenberg project, but I'm also very frustrated by it in the same. And I think it has clearly shown some of the real core weaknesses of the project as I call it, but also the strengths, because the strengths is how the third party part of the community have come on board and have built products that have dealt with some of the core weaknesses. I think some of the weaknesses, this is only my personal opinion, but I'm really interested to get your insight, is that some of the fault lines were almost inevitable by the way the project was kicked off. And in my opinion, some of the bedrock structures wasn't really that. More discussion should have been implemented before it was kicked off in some ways, but that's just my opinion. What are some of your thoughts about what I've just outlined?
For what it's worth, that is not just your opinion. When I first was named as the executive director, I spent 6 months going to the angriest community centers we had and just letting everyone tell me what they hated the most about me, I guess. I don't know. It wasn't me. I was brand new. Most people didn't know.
You seem very, very pleasant to me. So
I like to think I am, but yeah, I spent 6 months.
I wouldn't want to cross you. You know, be quite frank. I can see why you're the head of the, but you do it in a very diplomatic, and you're not there to make people's lives a misery. Obviously, you've got your objectives, right? So, right?
Yeah. So
sorry,
I've spent the first 6 months in this role talking to people about exactly these things, because I started this at the top of 2019. We merged 5.0 at the end of 2018. And so like what I wanted to do was find the angriest people and just be like, why are you mad today? And so I spent 6 months traveling the world to the mad people. And that was excellent, because this is what I heard from most of them, is like, we're not super upset or worried about what the change is. What we are upset about is how the change was done. I heard that so much that I gave a whole talk about change management at WordCamp Europe. And why it matters and why no one wants to do it. I love the change management process. It is one of my favorite things to do, because it requires logistics, planning, seeing the whole landscape, seeing all of the people who will be impacted and not impacted, and then helping all of those people see why you have to make the change, where you believe the next step is, and why it makes sense for them to come with you on it. And so like bringing people safely through complicated changes is one of my favorite things I ever get to do as a leader, because it matters so much. It matters so much. You can do so much more with people who understand why we have to do something versus just like being told we have to. And they are so much happier, and they will stay with you for longer. They'll stay in WordPress longer. And so you actually are not alone in that opinion. And I heard that opinion a lot in those first 6 months. And I was not involved at the early parts of the Gutenberg project. And so like, I would have done it differently probably, just because I am a different sort of leader. But the original hope that I really fought against was that we could just like do it, the Drupal way, and shut down external contributions, rewrite the whole thing, ship it as a new version, a huge breaking change, and then go from there. But I had learned, as you point out, Andrew, from researching major changes in other open source projects, that you do lose like half of your users. And again, if I believe that WordPress is the best solution for people to do what I think they can do with their lives, why would I want to put that at risk for people? And so I really advocated for the longest timeline we possibly could manage, and people did not agree with me early. Like the community as a whole was like, this bananas lady who we don't even know from Adam with this long timeline. But I would, if I had it to do all over again, I would advocate for the same thing. So
yeah, and I'm not of that opinion of the mad person. I embraced Gutenberg straight away. I think it's a definitely the way forward. I've always thought it was the way forward since it came along. you know, and there's a lovely man called Jamie Marsden who is Poodle Press, who just is a total advocate of Gutenberg and is a leader in teaching people about Gutenberg and embraced it. I've even got an Elementor to Gutenberg converter in the works. You know,
nice.
A plugin. We've got a plugin. It's a little bit buggy. If you've got someone at WordPress that wants to help us out with that would be helpful. But you
Send
know,
me the link. We're happy to take a look.
I talked to Matt about it in Berlin, and he went, "Here's my card." You know, so it's something needs going. But my point is that Gutenberg is a good thing. It's a good thing.
Yeah, I just want to make it clear that I am dying as an agency to just convert totally to Gutenberg. I think it's getting close.
Yeah.
I just want to put this in. Obviously, you work with Matt. Matt is an extremely complicated individual. You know, obviously he's a visionary, and I don't want to puff up his ego too much, but he is obviously a special entrepreneur and a special individual. Obviously, I've met a couple of other people of similar. They're always contradictory and hard to read, to say the least. But you know, the great strength of the WordPress project, you know, it seems to be in tech. There seems to be a lot of smoke and mirrors, and there seems to be a lot of forces in tech that are about dominating a market and reducing competition and reducing choice. And by doing that, pushing the financial benefits to the top of the pyramid. To Matt's ever credit, his commitment to open source and the principles of open source is a more flatter. So whether, do you agree that in general, there is a problem with tech and how in economical terms that it seems to be utilized as a tool that just magnifies economic benefit to a small minority? And where does WordPress open source project, because it seems to have some strong, it seems to be one of the forces that counters those trends. Is my question making sense? Because that's a big question. It's a big question.
I think that any emerging technology, even if it says that it stands to just like accomplish a big jubilee and create an even playing field for everyone, even if it says that, frequently it's not the disadvantaged who have the spare time to figure it out, right? And so like and this is one of the many, many reasons that I advocated for long timelines and teaching people as we go for anything, is because like, for instance, blockchain, everything to do with Web3, like the people that we're saying that technology is saying that will benefit the most, for sure, do not have the money to just kind of gamble around as that figures itself out and remains incredibly volatile. They certainly don't have the time. And so it does frequently start out, I think, by giving additional benefit to the people who already have benefit. And I don't love that. And so, yeah, I think that there is a general problem, maybe not with technology as in like high technology, but advancements. I think that is a frequent concern. And so you always do kind of have to, if you're leading in a way that is based on ethical concepts and humanity, have to look at how it affects people who otherwise don't have a lot of expendable time or money to be able to participate.
So segueing into that, you mentioned ethics. How do you, Josepha, Haden, Chomphosy, feel about the WordPress dashboard? What are your thoughts on that?
That is the funniest ethics segue that anyone has ever offered me. How do I feel about the WordPress dashboard? What do you?
With plugin developers advertising in there, doing little
that
notices and
yes.
maybe calling their plugins different names to what they're actually called on the repository. Blah blah blah. You know, we had a bit of a to-do in this WP-Tonic podcast about a particular plugin developer that actually the plugin is called something new, and it's basically 1 million downloads of the previous name, and they've just called it the same name with a couple of extra additions. When it's installed into WordPress, it's actually called something different, which is an already established WordPress plugin. So that kind of abuse.
That does sound like abuse. I'm going to go back and find that podcast and see what we're talking about.
Yeah, well, I can tell you. I'll tell you offline, but it's actually out there in the open. So, you know, it's an interesting ethical situation. Also about spamming the WP.org using SEO tactics that aren't particularly ethical, but also more so the dashboard itself. When you log in as an admin, you're literally, and you've got say 5 or 6 freemium products on there. The nags that you get, upgrade to pro. What do you think about this? Give us a 5-star review. Do all that kind of stuff. What are you, Josepha, thinking about that? Is it in your mind, or is there someone else trying to deal with that, or is it a political situation because there's some big players involved and whatever? What's your thoughts on that?
So I do have thoughts, because I have thoughts about almost everything in WordPress. However, so if wishes were fishes, if I had no one to answer to except for myself, there are specific things that I would do and want to advocate for, but I don't answer to only myself. I talk to at WordCamps and things, users as often as I can, people who have no idea who I am, and hear what they hate the most about WordPress so that we can try to fix it. And I know that this is one of those things that our users as a whole really, really find stressful, or they just get completely blind to it. And that's not what any of our folks building businesses on WordPress want either.
No,
and so there are a lot of competing priorities around that. Like even within just all the spheres of influence that you see in the WordPress project, right? Like the core folks want something different than the people who are extending WordPress, and the people who are extending WordPress want something different than the end users of WordPress, and the visitors don't care because like they're not seeing it. But but you know, there are a lot of different things, and so finding the ethical way to balance the ability for people to continue to make a living in the ecosystem that we have provided to them, while also streamlining the experience for users, is something that absolutely is on my mind. I have pitched a few potential solutions for that, and as is my way, did then a bunch of research about how solutions like that worked in other ecosystems, and pumped the brakes on my suggestions for the solution, because it turns out that it is something that really changes your relationship with your community at that point. The types of suggestions that I've made about how to streamline the experience for users, but also still make it possible for extenders in the community to make a living with it. And we're not, with the raucous rough sea that we have in WordPress right now, we wouldn't be able to withstand any change like that, even if it were perfect and an excellent solution and made everyone happy. It would be a really big change. So yep, I have lots of thoughts about it, and I talk to all sorts of stakeholders in that space about what should be prioritized and what their biggest pain points are, what their biggest worries are, what their biggest hopes are. And it's a really hard problem to solve. And yeah, we got a lot of big problems that we're struggling through together. So
when it comes to Gutenberg, one of the things I've observed is how important UX design is to a change when it's around a software project like what this is. I think there's other questions around Gutenberg, but one of the things, and it's just honest feedback, I don't think the importance of really good UX design was a key element when it initially kicked off. And I really feel when you're dealing with different software solutions, UX design and usability are becoming they always have been extremely important, but it's just become on steroids, really.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that? That more some of the problems of Gutenberg was around not putting enough resources and enough effort in the initial thoughts around UX design?
Sorry, I'm separating out my answers in my brain. I had to look in my thinking spot, which is over there. Yeah, I think that we had some excellent designers working on that project early on, but not a lot of full-time design time. And so we did have to rely on our developers to make good UX choices.
Right.
And on the one hand, that is a thing that you kind of would expect from an open source contributor. Like they got a lot of broad skill sets, but at the same time, developers build for developers, designers build for designers. And so you do really need some dedicated, clear-eyed resources, people, time that is focused on how would this user journey go? How would this user flow work? And so we changed it. We got a lot of dedicated designers on it now. And so,
and isn't that what FSE or full site editing is about? You know, templating, and how's the renaming of full site editing going? Because that's the way that page builder. You know, I'm a page builder guy. Jonathan's a page builder guy. We've always had theming. You know, before my particular page builder didn't have theming, I built headers and footers, which would you know, as a plugin, so they could do the theming. Now they've got theming, you know, that plugin's dead. But the point is that that's the point about the open source community. We develop stuff that's not quite ready, and that's what's happened with people like Cadence, with loads of Generate Press and all that kind of stuff. They've got all their own blocks. I've even got a block plugin. You know, those that's what we do, because if it's not there, we want it now. You know, so that's what we've all done, is we've built our own block plugins, we've built our own headers and footers inserters and all that kind of stuff. But now with FSE progressing, which it is, and people like WP Engine, Ryan Gardner, you know, developing full site editing stuff, Rich Tabor from Extendify developing full site editing stuff, you know, and patterns as well. Gutenberg had a lot to catch up on, right, with the patterns and with the templating and with all that kind of stuff. So I get that there are difficulties there, but don't you think that you're solving that now with full site editing, the UX issue?
I mean, we're moving toward it. Yes. I always hesitate to be like, we're perfect.
Solving, you know, it's quite specific. Solving.
No, I'm just great that you know, I'm just very optimistic that you see that it was an issue. But don't get me wrong, it's, you know, UX design, it's tricky, isn't it? Especially when you've got a big project.
Gosh, yes.
You know, it's all right for me to say this stuff, but I'm not in the trenches having to deal with it. So it's all right for me to throw a few rocks, but I'm not dealing with the day-to-day reality of the situation anyway. So, but at least I've got that self-awareness that I'm just being honest here. I just want to
add a final thought. Responding to that feedback from a lot of people around like concerns about how we were bringing our, I like to call us co-creators through this project with our developers. In response to that, we did create a specific testing program around the user interface inside the block editor, inside the site editor. And so like that has really helped us move a lot faster and a lot quicker on getting the user flows better.
Cool.
And I can't understate how important that program has been to making sure that we move with what users want and need a bit better. So
Perfect.
But just to finish off, I just see with the WordPress, the total project, you've just got different groups of people they've got to look after themselves. They have, you've got organizations like WP Engine, you've got other hosting companies. Some of these are enormous companies. They've got their own business objectives. And then you've got people in the WordPress, small developers, small agencies like me, Andrew with his great plugin. You've got such a diverse group of players, and they're all got their own individual needs and wants. So it really, but what tends to happen, they tend to lose the big picture, is that if they don't try and work together, they're going to end up with nothing. Would you agree with that they need to sometimes see the bigger picture?
Yeah, I'm fond of using a racing metaphor here, and I've got to find a different one because it doesn't work for everybody, but I'm just going to explain it. So in racing, in Formula One, you've got like teams and they have two drivers, and the two drivers should play the team game, right? Like they should be trying to win for the team. But every once in a while, you've got drivers who are just like in a field by themselves. They got no one else to fight with, so they fight with each other. And while they're busy fighting with each other, someone passes them. That is considered a less good car or a less good driver or a less good strategist. And I do think that any group that is spending a substantial amount of time fighting with itself is at risk for that. And I do see also that is a concern that I have for WordPress. Like, I know that I try to really galvanize people and bring them through all of the issues with us together. But I know that I can't make everyone happy. I don't try to make everyone happy. I try not to make all the same people mad all the time. I feel like that's my best bet. But like too much of that, like you have to have enough dissent that that you're stress testing your product and your project and making the right choices because people cared enough to look, but not so much that it's just wild discord. And it's hard to get that right balance, and it's hard to know when you've met a critical mass of one side or the other as well. So
you don't want an organization or community that just it's all love and there's no honest discussion. But on the other hand, if it's just total mayhem and argument, that doesn't help anybody, does it? It just leads to implosion and decline, doesn't it? It's finding the happy medium, and that's tricky, isn't it?
Yes.
Which you have found out.
I wrote a post somewhere ages and ages ago about how I feel like if you have an organization that has zero dissenting opinions at all whatsoever, it's a sign of an unhealthy organization. Ages ago, like 2015, I wrote that post somewhere, and I don't know where it is as a result. But I agree. I think healthy discussion is good. I think civil discussion is important. And yeah, I know that I gave that whole answer about like I went to the angry people, but like that's my job. And so it wasn't I went to angry people because they're angry and they made me sad. Like it is my job to find
I'm going to be honest
the pain
with you.
points are and help people. So.
I want to be honest with you. I'm very encouraged by this interview. You seem
good.
You seem a very upfront, honest. Want the best for WordPress, and I'm encouraged that you're one of the leaders in the WordPress project. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Hopefully you'll come back and have another discussion. And we move forward on this interesting ship of a project.
That's right.
We're going to end it now, tribe. We'll see you next week. Thanks a lot.
Big goodbye. Big
Thanks.
bye. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.